Okay, top of the hour. We're ready to go. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I'm Kevin Jones, and I have Frank here with me, Frank Galuska. We are going to do another in the series, the Techbox series of events with our close partners and friends, ACD, Advanced Controls and Distribution. What we're going to be talking about here in this discussion is getting plant visibility with Siemens PLCs and Ewon devices. Unfortunately, there we go, looking for the screen change here. Unfortunately, Lou couldn't join us, President and CEO of ACD, but Frank is here as well as myself, and we're going to talk about how and why we could and should choose the technology we do. What are some of the ideas, rules, principles, best practices that we like to use to do that? Because I think that's going to be really informative for a lot of people. And then we'll have Frank get into showing us some very specific technical ideas around some of those products where we're going to get data out of a bottling line of a brewery. And we're going to be using the Ewon Flexy device and an interesting approach for using Ewon Flexys, which we haven't seen, but I think it's going to be really, really valuable. The end goal of everything we do is to help companies become data-driven manufacturers. We think of manufacturers or work a lot with manufacturers as a company, and those manufacturers have challenges. The current pandemic has not helped the situation. Things were already just becoming difficult. Limited workforce, products are more expensive, raw materials, etc. A lot more competition, and we have a lot of challenges within the plant themselves. The machine downtime, production throughput, a lot of challenges. And the question then becomes, with all these challenges, how do we solve them? Well, the idea is let's get more data. Let's get an understanding of what's going on. Let's get that deeper visibility into the plant to understand what's going on with the plant. It's very difficult to support the solution. Very difficult to change a system out. Very expensive. And you're not accessing the data that is in the plant. Probably 70 or 80% of the data. That hidden factory or that dark data that's trapped in the PLCs and the controller. That's additional valuable data you could grab as well, but a lot of companies don't have the ability to do that. The reason you want to start to grab a lot more of that data and organize it is so that you can become a data-driven manufacturer. What does becoming a data-driven manufacturer look like? Everything and everyone is plugged into the network. And then at that point, all layers of the business are integrated and you're able to run the business based on the data from all those layers. And then all the stakeholders, not just people internal to the organization, but potentially customers and suppliers can have access to certain data as well, so that you can have a better understanding of the current state of the business in real time, as well as the future state of the business in real time. A lot of the solutions we create typically look like this. Data monitoring, monitoring machines, trending, process data for backwards analysis, visualizing data for machines across the globe if you are an OEM company. And these kinds of data-driven solutions can work really well. But the question is, how do you do this? Well, typically what we like to do is to take an approach where you start with a digital strategy at the high level. From leadership could be defining a digital strategy, which defines how the company values the data and how they're going to use the data to drive value within the organization, drive better decisions, drive the company forward, ultimately potentially even drive not only just profit and revenue, but also to drive better valuation. With that digital strategy, then at that point, the digital strategy could be used from the plant floor on up throughout the organization. With a digital strategy in place, that should then start to point us in the direction of using principles and practices like ISA 95. And then we also have a set of 4 technology rules, including lightweight, report by exception, edge-driven, and open technology that help us define and select the kinds of technologies we should be using in our architectures. The one that I'm going to take just a moment here to point out, the open technology rule, defines for us being open with the kinds of products that we use, like Canary Labs. You can connect to virtually any data source with it. You don't have to pay an arm and a leg to do it for their historian and their visualization products. And With that in mind, that then steers us away from some of the larger proprietary, much more expensive solutions that might not work for our companies and the kind of work we're doing. Another one of the ideas that comes out of these technology rules is this idea of unified namespace. Unified namespace is something that comes from, in part, ISA 95 standard, which defines how to organize the data within your plant. Enterprise, site, area, line, and cell. You essentially, with your tags from your machines, create if you will, a tree view of your data. And if you organize your data with that structure, then you can have a really well organized set of data, and you always know where to go for that data, as opposed to crazy naming conventions that we've seen at a lot of other companies. One of the last principles that we like to talk about for how to start to become a data-driven manufacturer is to use the agile project approach. Agile being flexible, incremental. It's an idea of managing projects that came primarily out of the software industry, and it means essentially trying to eat that elephant one bite at a time, rather than trying to implement a big MES system all at once a year and a half later, and maybe $500,000 or $1 million later. That implementation will probably have gone about as smoothly as your ERP implementation did, a couple years back or 10 years ago. Instead, why don't we eat that elephant one bite at a time, using these flexible, scalable technologies to create the solutions. If you start to apply these rules, then you can start to create solutions that look a little bit like this. Monitoring multiple systems with a single data broker is the clearinghouse of the data, publishing data into that data broker, and then each of the other devices and technologies can subscribe to that data. At that point, then any and every system can have real-time visibility into what's going on, because all that data is passed through this clearinghouse, if you will, called the data broker. There are a lot more details that we get into in other videos on our YouTube channel, so feel free to check those out. I want to keep this brief and leave time for Frank to talk about what he's here to show us. So let's remember back to our last conversation, this theoretical brewing company with a bottling line, where we have a PLC or multiple PLCs on that brewing line that are gathering data from the bottling line. And what we want to do, what we did in our last video in the Techbox series, was to illustrate how we get the data out of that Siemens PLC and get it into the cloud. And as an example, getting it into an open technology product like Canary Labs, historian and data visualization product. We went through some of those details here, so feel free to reference that last video for some of those details. This time, we're going to talk about how to use the Ewon Flexy product and how it's connected to the Siemens PLC to send data out. Now, keep in mind, we've worked with a number of OEM companies over time, and when we see the Ewon Flexy put in place, very often we'll see service departments where they are reaching out into the machine, right into the Flexy, over a secure connection to get data out. And then to see another machine, they reach into that machine to get data out, to see if it's running, how well it's running, get some basic details, get some logs on process data, get error logs, etc. Then they'll reach out to another one and reach out to another one. In my mind, hey, this is 2021. It's very nearly 2022. We should have the ability to have the data come to us. And so that's what we created here, just a quick demo of what it's like and how what the technical details are like for getting the data to effectively come to us in a small cloud solution. So with that, Frank, is there any details that I missed to set you up for the demo?
I think we're ready to jump into it.
All right, please do. I will stop my share, and then you can start to share.
So yeah, configuration web page for the Ewon. Like I was saying, you can either access this via being directly connected to it, or after going through and setting up the Ewon to have an internet connection, like I've done, just tied into my my home's internet through the router, I can actually, any PC on the network can then hit this web page. So I don't need to be sitting next to the Flexi itself with the Ethernet cable or anything like that. Um, I'm on the same network, so I can access it remotely.
So this is the configuration page where you're directly connected into that Flexi device itself, right?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct. So the first step is to get the data out of our Siemens PLC into the Flexi. So in order to do that, you can set up I/O servers. There's a couple default servers such as Modbus connections, OPC UA connections, S73 and 400s for the Siemens. I'm using a S7 1200 again, like our last video, and I'm going to be getting that data via OPC. So you can see in this OPC configuration, all I had to do was supply the endpoint URL. If I wanted to set up some security, I could, some certificates, that type of thing, some basic security. And then
so the Ewon, just as a quick review, the Ewon is networked to the Siemens, so the Ewon can see the IP address of the Siemens. You've defined the IP and the port, made a couple of the settings, and then that allows them to connect because you've selected the OPC UA IO.
Yes, yeah, the Ewon itself has 4 Ethernet ports on it, and I'm using one of those to connect to the PLC itself and pull data over OPC UA.
Okay, good.
So if I go to my values here, I have a handful of tags. These are coming directly out of PLC. If I switch over to the setup view, I can hit add and get this little pop up on the side. Go to my OPC UA configuration, browse my objects. And now I'm in the Siemens controller itself. So if I go to the server's interface, I have all of my PLC tags that are accessible over OPC UA at my disposal. So I can add any of these tags to my Ewon. It'll pull that data and store it locally, and eventually we'll use the Ewon to push that data to a MQTT data broker.
Okay, so once you've connected to the PLC, then we've got to set up the tags, and that's a manual process here where you set up each tag from the PLC. You select the certain tags that you want to grab.
Correct.
Okay, good.
And this is actually a nice thing about this, as you mentioned, Kevin, a lot of OEMs already have these for maintenance and troubleshooting purposes.
Yep.
So you have that same capabilities here that I can, edit a tag value. So this just a simple boolean here. I can switch it from a 0 to a 1, apply that change, and it takes, and now that value is updated in the PLC.
So this is how you would potentially do configuration changes. And this, for people who are familiar with Flexis and use them where they're connected to PLCs, they're probably comfortable with this part already, right?
Yeah. If you use Flexis in the past, this is how you can go in and make those configuration changes.
Okay, awesome, great.
So then what I'm doing is taking these list of tags and publishing them from the Ewon to a data broker that is currently being hosted on a AWS in the cloud. An AWS server running a data broker, pushing data up to that. So there's 2 main ways of doing this. The method I'm using is just with the basic scripting language that the Ewon provides. An alternative is using Java code and having Java stored on the Ewon. Both would work. In this, I'm just using the scripting language is a little bit more visible than looking at kind of the file system of the Ewon. So you can see here, I'm printing out every time I send a message. So I'm actually sending 4 different topics each consisting of different data. So you can just see the data I'm sending, it's OEE data, heating temperature, the coil fault, the in-feed, out-feed counts. So those 4 kind of categories of data over 4 separate topics. See my MQTT broker URL here in my AWS server.
So you said you were using the script to generate the MQTT data and send it up to the data broker?
Yes, this script is what is actually making the connection, and later on down the script, I'm looping through the tags defined in the Ewon here and sending data out.
Okay. And then in the script, you have that print command too, just so you can see what you're sending out live,
just
as
for
a test. Okay, great.
Visualization purposes.
Great. So it's the script that's then doing the real work of formatting the data into MQTT format and pushing it up to the data broker. Okay, good.
Yes. Yep. So from then, I then have a platform. Anything that can subscribe to an MQTT data broker can receive this data. So in this case, I'm just using something pretty basic like Grafana to grab that data and subscribe to those topics, just for some quick visualization here. So you can see my overall in-feed and out-feed counts, my heating temperature over the last 15 minutes, as well as this coil fault. And you can see, that fault was coming in and out until I made that change in the configuration on the Ewon. So I flipped that bit from 0 to 1, kind of resetting my fault, and it's been steady ever since.
Okay, so then you are just kind of catching up here a little bit. Once the data has arrived in the data broker, it's been published to the data broker, because data brokers within QTT is pub sub or publish subscribe. Then you need another system to subscribe to that data broker and pull the data out and then do whatever you need, which is potentially display data. Typically, we work, especially for proofs of concepts and pilot projects, we work with Canary Labs and its historian and visualization tool, in part because the visualization tool is really good and really easy to work with. Then what we'll typically do is then take the visualization tool as the product for the customer matures. Well, then we will relegate the visualization tool to be used by maintenance and controls engineers, application engineers, product engineers, where they can really focus on the process data, and any of the other high-level data processing and calculations and visualizations will start to move off to other products like Factory Studio in TatSoft or Ignition by Inductive Automation here, and then the historian for Canary Labs would still do its job, which is storing all of the data. And here we happen to be using Grafana just as another example of visualizing the data as we pull data from the data broker. All of that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate.
So we've essentially shown within what I could think of outside of my extra talking there for a couple of minutes. It took us only 10 minutes from the start of your conversation to now to say, hey, here's how we're pulling data from, and here's how you can set up data from a Siemens PLC as an example into an Ewon Flexy, get the data up to a data broker, and then into a visualization tool. A little bit more work to set those tools up, et cetera. It's not only just 10 minutes, but what I'm seeing from this, Frank, is this is far, far from rocket science. That makes sense?
Yeah, it's once all the pieces are there, it's just kind of establishing your data flow in the right way, and making sure you have the Ewon getting data from the Siemens PLC and pushing it out to a data broker, and so that it's available to platforms like Canary and Grafana and anything else that can subscribe to a MQTT data broker.
Good. So one more thing, and then I think you have a couple more things to get into. So once that data is in the data broker, really it's no holds barred as far as how you want to use the data. All kinds of ways that you can use the data. Get it into historian, get it into a product like Factory Studio or frameworks from TatSoft or Ignition, or get into any other kinds of products. You could connect a lot of different products to that data broker to publish data, to get more data into that data broker, to add more context to the data, and to subscribe, to pull the data and analyze it and get push in again. So there's a lot of flexibility, and this extreme flexibility is why we like these kinds of architectures and principles and sets of 4 rules. It helps us select products that have extreme levels of flexibility and scalability. Okay.
And just kind of expanding on that a little bit, going back to one of your favorite things, Kevin, that in that data broker, then you have that one version of the truth, right? That's that's your data, and anything that gets that data is going to be the same result. It's time stamped. It's kind of set in stone. But that's what it is.
Well said. Well said. All right. What's next?
The basic concept here is just that each of these charts, if I go in to edit them, you can just see I'm just subscribing to my topics that that my Ewon's publishing, and then just going through my kind of typical Grafana setup here, colorizing things and setting scales for the charts and that kind of thing. So really, the topics are really how the way to structure your data, so that it makes sense, right? You don't want to kind of mix your OEE data with your heating temperature.
Awesome.
And I guess one other thing to note is just that, like we talked about last week, this is report by exception, so it's only when this data is changing is it sending those topics out.
Yep. Yeah, it's one of those rules: report by exception. Data goes one direction. And it's only reporting the data only when it changes, which saves significantly in bandwidth and makes security better, because protocols like OPC UA are bidirectional pull response. You don't have to open up that firewall, if there is one, to allow the request to go through. It's just coming through one way on the way out. And that's one of the things that, that's a good point. One of the things that makes using products like the Ewon, where it can push the data out to the cloud, much better. So for any firewalls that might be around that, again, don't need to worry about the poking holes, opening ports, setting rules on those ports for incoming data. It's just outbound only.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So we will wrap it here. I appreciate everybody showing up. Thank you so much for being here. And we will talk to you again soon. Take care.